In a significant moment for global trade, Donald Trump's announced sweeping new taxes on imports from around the world. The president said that America had been ripped off by foreigners for decades. He signed the executive order in the White House Rose Garden and described it as Liberation Day. So let's look at some of the headline figures. There'll be a universal baseline tariff of 10% on all imports coming into the US. Now, that's the rate that will be imposed on the UK. The European Union has been hit with a higher 20% tariff, and he imposed an additional 34% tariff on China. That's on top of the 20% tariffs already announced. Well, our North America correspondent David Willis begins our coverage.
This is one of the most important days, in my opinion, in American history. It's our declaration of economic independence.
In the scented surroundings of the White House Rose Garden, President Trump told his audience the United States had been looted, raped and pillaged by nations near and far. No longer.
So, if you look at that, China, first row.
Like a bookie offering odds at a horse race, the president listed tariffs ranging from a baseline of 10%, which the UK will have to pay, to reciprocal taxes on countries that have measures in place to keep US products out of their markets. 20% on goods from EU nations, 24% on products from Japan, all the way to tariffs of 54% on imports from America's biggest trading partner, China.
The United Kingdom, 10%, and we'll go 10%. So we'll do the same thing. Reciprocal, that means they do it to us and we do it to them. Very simple. Can't get any simpler than that. For nations that treat us badly, we will calculate the combined rate of all their tariffs, non-monetary barriers, and other forms of cheating.
Car dealers reported a rush to buy motor vehicles ahead of a separate 25% tariff on foreign imports, which came into effect overnight. President Trump believes that combined, these measures will boost American manufacturing and, in his words, make America wealthy again. But some big questions remain unanswered. Will US importers absorb the cost of these tariffs or pass them on to their customers? And given the threat of retaliation from other nations, does this mark the start of a global trade war? David Willis, BBC News.
Well, Sir Keir Starmer has been reacting to the tariffs imposed on the UK.
We have to understand that just as with defence and security, so too for the economy and trade. We are living in a changing world, entering a new era. We must rise to this challenge, and that is why I've instructed my team to move further and faster on the changes I believe will make our economy stronger and more resilient. Because this government will do everything necessary to defend the UK's national interests.
We'll be with our UK political correspondent shortly, but let's focus in on China because China has promised resolute countermeasures against the moves against its country, saying that it is maintaining communication with the US over trade. So let's cross over to Beijing. Our China correspondent Stephen McDonald joins us live now. China being hit very much the hardest when it comes to all of these different levies.
Yes, well, this latest round of tariffs from Donald Trump is a typical act of unilateral bullying, according to the Chinese government. Tough words from Beijing after this latest round of tariffs was placed on Chinese goods. Now, if you add them all up, we're up to now 54%, the tariffs on Chinese goods going into the US. Of course, that's going to hurt Chinese companies wanting to sell into the American market. But Beijing has promised its own resolute countermeasures. Now, we don't know what they are, but it doesn't sound like nothing. Of course, when these countermeasures come in, that's going to hit US companies wanting to sell into the huge Chinese market. And, you know, again, when you look at the language coming out of the government here, the Commerce Ministry put out a statement today attacking the very idea that this was somehow reciprocal. I'll just give you the quote. The so-called reciprocal tariffs are based on the US's unilateral and subjective assessments. So they're just making fun of the whole idea that this is a provocation which has been foisted upon the US government. And what's going to be interesting now, though, is to see the extent to which trade patterns might alter. Might that huge block of Europe and China band together other countries, cutting the US out of the loop that would further hurt the US economy. But all this is to be played out in the months ahead.
Stephen, as always, many thanks. Stephen McDonald there joining us from Beijing. Thank you. So that was the reaction from China. We know also that the EU was hit hard with 20% levies. The European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen described the US tariffs as a major blow to the world economy. She said the EU had always been ready to negotiate with the US to remove barriers to transatlantic trade.
President Trump's announcement of universal tariffs on the whole world, including the European Union, is a major blow to the world economy. I deeply regret this choice. Let's be clear-eyed about the immense consequences. The global economy will massively suffer. Uncertainty will spiral and trigger the rise of further protectionism. The consequences will be dire for millions of people around the globe, also for the most vulnerable countries, which are now subject to some of the highest US tariffs.
So a stark warning there. Let's cross over to Berlin because our correspondent Rupert Wingfield-Hayes joins us now. And it feels like Ursula von der Leyen has always been talking about retaliation on the part of the EU, but now there is a willingness to negotiate. A bit of a change of tune there.
Well, Europe is not in a strong position, Cassia, when you look at this situation that has emerged overnight. Europe has a huge trade surplus with the United States, around $250 billion a year. And European exporters, particularly here in Europe's biggest economy, Germany, are very, very dependent on the United States market. I mean, I saw one statistic this morning that 1 in every 4 cars produced by the Porsche company here in Germany is sold to the United States. And Germany's car industry is very, very important to the German economy. So what to do? I mean, a trade war would be bad for everybody. So it's understandable that Ursula von der Leyen's first response is to look for negotiations. And while she says there's a package of measures that have been put in place if negotiations fail, it's very, very clear from the very gloomy mood here in Europe that the initial hope is that there can be a negotiated way out of these tariffs.
Rupert, as always, thank you. Rupert Wingfield-Hayes with The View from the EU. Now, we heard what Sir Keir Starmer was saying a little bit earlier on. Let's get a little bit more on that with our chief political correspondent, Henry Zeffman, who joins us live outside Downing Street. Henry, so just bring us up to date because there is scope. The UK is still in negotiations. There is hope of a potential negotiation, some sort of deal.
That's right, and that's why the Prime Minister has been urging calm this morning. He had a dozen or so leaders of some of the biggest businesses in this country into Downing Street first thing this morning to really try to reassure them that he is doing all he can to mitigate the impact of these tariffs. So domestically, he talked about making the UK economy more resilient, but I think it's the international sphere that's most important. He is still talking about trying to secure that deal with the US, an economic agreement which would span all sorts of things, including technology and agriculture and goods, but would mean the reduction, perhaps even the dismantling altogether of these tariffs. What people I speak to in government, though, have no handle on whatsoever is whether President Trump himself agrees with and is willing to sign, and over what time frame he might be willing to sign, that deal which his own team have been negotiating with the UK. If he does sign that deal, great, although clearly still the UK would be affected by the ruptures in the global economy. But if he doesn't sign that deal, then I think you will see more pressure building here in the UK for Sir Keir Starmer to retaliate.